I strongly recommend not taking the X-Half too seriously, because it's all about optics this round, and I'm not referring to the lens. It's the way things are looked at. This is Fujifilm's latest X-series camera, which understandably comes with the expectations of an X-series camera. The way this camera got teased, I can see why those expectations are possible, but I don't really understand why Fujifilm positioned this as part of the X-series lineup. It's not even an APS-C, but what I'm trying to say is this is incredibly different to anything else in the X series. So if you expect this is gonna be anything like an X100 or the XM5, your expectations are not gonna be met. The appeal of this camera is rather unique, but before we can even get to that, we need a round of managing expectations. So let me start getting a few X-series impressions out of your head. First off, this uses a vertical 3x4 1-inch sensor. Second, this weighs next to nothing, and just about everything you touch on this is going to be plastic, so don't go expecting a luxury build like the one on the GFX 100 RF. And finally, the way you interface with the X-Half is actually quite digital, though it does do a fair job of balancing that out with a small number of physical controls. So perhaps we could start with that. To turn the camera on, you've actually got to push the power switch inwards on the X-Half. Muscle memory is always flicking to the right to turn on, but once you do that, it mechanically pops the frame advance lever out. And if you try to tuck the lever back into its flush position, you'll only be able to do that when the power switch is back in the off position. This actually serves one of my favorite features on the X-Half, and that's holding the frame advance lever down to temporarily peek at the last shot you took. No need to go into the playback menu, then back out just to chimp at your last shot. Though these, along with the stills and movie toggle, would be the entirety of physical controls available from the back panel. You can see there's quite an absence of buttons on the X-Half. You do at least get an EV dial, which circles the shutter button. There is an iris ring around the lens in one-stop increments, there's a focus ring beside that, and then there's a switch on the left edge for enabling the flash. But that's actually it for physical controls. Everything else will have to be done through the two touch displays on the X-Half. Not gonna lie, the small display along with all the touch gestures did remind me a lot of using an action camera. It was quite frustrating to use at first because they didn't feel very responsive until I cracked the code that you shouldn't swipe in all the way from the edges. Just a flick in the general direction and they become incredibly responsive. Displaying film sims on the sub monitor does look really cool, but I do think that the UI can be further improved upon. For example, double tapping the film simulation could perhaps let me select them from a grid view on the main display, because cycling through film simulations sequentially from the sub monitor tends to take a moment. This doesn't have all the film simulations, though it does have 13, including all the newer ones like Reala Ace, Nostalgic Neg, and Classic Neg. There's also a filters mode borrowed over from the Instax series as an alternative to film simulations, and there are 3 brand new filters on the X-Half, namely Light Leak, Halation, and Expired Film. I'm not typically a fan of filters, though Halation does actually look pretty cool. Image quality in general out of the X-Half is actually surprisingly good. I would not have expected that tiny 10.8mm f2.8 lens to actually resolve this well. The sensor is 17.74 megapixels, interesting number, and fun fact, the X-Half's technical model name is the XH-F1. And while the images out of the XH-F1 do look great, again, don't expect X-series levels of dynamic range or any amount of bokeh for that matter. It's not great in low light, though you could argue it adds to the gritty aesthetic of early era digital snapshots. Compensated for crop factor, the 10.8mm lens gives you a full frame equivalence field of view of 32mm. You can tell the lens is actually way tinier than it looks, but it has actual aperture blades and a mechanical shutter that maxes out at 1/2000th of a second. So then, what's it like to use this camera? Well, its footprint is absolutely tiny, so bringing this around is rarely ever a problem. With a battery and memory card, this takes W126S batteries by the way, this actually weighs less than my iPhone with a case on. Size-wise, it's a bit thick, but still makes a 16 Pro Max look huge by comparison. Fuji didn't say which processor they've put in here, but it's not the X Processor 5, because I do wish at times the camera was a bit snappier. From power on times, to autofocus, then shutter response, it's not the quickest. There's a few more things on this which will continue to put off serious photographers, like the built-in flash being an LED one instead of a xenon flash. If you want to use an external flash on this, you're also out of luck because this has only a cold shoe. I was also unable to trigger an external flash optically using the built-in one. This doesn't shoot RAW photos, it's JPEG only, and there's no continuous drive mode. Those were the reasons I said to not take this camera too seriously. It's an X series, but one which was never intended for professional deployment. It's literally designed around light-hearted, stress-free photography. The vertical format should be enough of a hint. In case you're wondering, the OVF is vertical as well, though there's no further overlays through the OVF. It's really more of a framing estimator. I'm surprised they were generous enough to include an eye sensor for the OVF so it blacks out the screen to reduce glare. This also shoots video in one format, vertical 1080p in 4:3. Missed opportunity to call it OpenGate if you ask me. It saves the video as 24p files, though it is possible to record at 48 FPS, which the camera slows down internally for you. But perhaps one of the coolest things you can do with the X-Half is combine moving images and still images. When you pull the frame advance lever, the X-Half is going to combine the next shot you take with the previous, essentially diptych photography, but with this you can internally combine two videos, or a still image with a video, or both still images. And here's my overwhelmingly artistic diptych to express how cameras cost money. In addition to the merged side-by-side image, the camera will also retain both of the original shots. The second most unique thing about the X-Half is a film camera mode, which simulates the experience of using a film camera. Once you activate that, you commit to film camera mode until you've finished one roll of film. You can't see any preview on the LCD screen. Your only utility for framing is the OVF. You've also got to pull the frame advance lever between each shot, and once you're done with a roll, you still won't be able to look at the images from the camera because you need to develop that film. And the way to do that is with the dedicated X-Half app. The images are actually still definitely saved to the SD card, but just in a different folder. You could technically access the images this way, but the more accurate way is to develop them with the app. One digital flexibility given is the ability to choose how many shots one roll of film is. On a real half frame, one roll is 72 shots, but if you don't want to commit to that many shots, you can go as little as 36 shots on the X-Half. It is quite successful at creating that sense of anticipation, wondering how your shots turned out, but I find that to be the case with the X-Half, even without having to commit to film camera mode. Part of it has to do with that rather small display. It's not high resolution, the playback experience isn't great due also to the total lack of buttons on this thing, and those are typically bad things about a camera. My first few weeks with this, I was incredibly dismissive about it. I was fresh off reviewing the GFX 100 RF, so it's quite a transition. But one thing I didn't see coming, because I didn't like the camera very much at first, was how eagerly I wanted to check my shots from a laptop, because that tiny screen is essentially showing me only a thumbnail of what I've shot. And by discouraging me looking at the shots on the back of my camera, it's created this weird opportunity where I have to set time aside and look at what I've shot. It did sort of take me back to the pre-camera phone days where all your little slices of life were documented on this little digital point-and-shoot camera, and the whole vibe of the 3x4 photos out of a small sensor did make me feel like I was looking through some archived photos from 2005. Another unique appeal about this camera is actually its inability to shoot RAW. Again, something stemming from what's typically a limitation, but it actually forces you to be very deliberate with all your choices. JPEG only means everything is baked in. After you pick a film simulation or filter, there's no changing your mind afterwards. There's also that feature which imprints a date stamp onto your images. If you turn that on, that date stamp is going to be a part of that picture forever. I thought the grain effect I dialed in was a bit strong in this picture, but I'll have to live with that decision. This will always be my grainy rainbow. One thing that does bother me a little is its price. It's $699. And I feel a camera like this should be priced a lot more accessibly if it wants to be chosen over a camera phone for snapshots. You could argue that this costs less than the average smartphone today, but you're paying for something very different on the X-Half compared to everything else in the X series. It's almost like buying a disposable film camera today. You're not buying it for the quality nor the convenience of it, you're buying into the fun of it. In a sense, the X-Half is a camera made not for photographers, but really more for the person who just wants a camera in their life.